Hello everyone, I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. My best friend went missing in Grand Teton, but I think he saved my life. Are you sure you want to do this, Landon? You hate camping. My girlfriend sat cross-legged on our bed watching me cram things into the hiking backpack my foster dad had given me for my birthday, the year he passed away. The plan had been for us to spend one weekend every summer hiking through the mountains together. I wanted to get more fit, and we both wanted to spend more time with each other. So in March of that year, he gave me this great backpack for my 22nd birthday. And then he went and died in June, 3 weeks before our first trip. To be honest, I had been so mad at him for going and dying on me that I had thrown the backpack in my closet and forgotten about it until now. I had never been crazy about camping. I'd only wanted to spend time with Hank. I looked back at her and said, "Yeah, I'm sure. And it's not really camping, more like," she smirked, "a rescue mission?" I chuckled, but there was a deep pit in the bottom of my stomach as I said, "Yeah, more like a rescue mission, I guess." My best friend Patrick had gone on a solo backpacking trip a few weeks prior. He started in Grand Teton and was supposed to be back by now. He'd been using his emergency sat-nav device to send me the occasional message, and as time had progressed, his messages were only getting weirder, harder to understand. I got my last ping for his location a few days ago, then he fell off the map. So I and a few other people were heading out to look for him. We were all going to start within a few miles of his last location and hike through the area to see if we could find him or any trace of him. The next morning, before the sun even had a chance to rise, I piled into my friend Max's Jeep. Tyler and Cody were already there, and he drove us out to the middle of nowhere. The four of us were quiet as we sipped gross instant coffee out of a thermos and listened to the early morning talk show hosts on the radio as they discussed some video that was trending. When we got to the parking spot below the first hiking trail, we all got out, collected our things, and made sure the sat-nav devices Cody had ordered online were all working. They were, and he explained that in order to message each other, we would have to keep our phones on, charged, and connected to the device via Bluetooth. We had all brought small solar-powered battery packs, so we didn't expect to run into trouble there. He also told us, very begrudgingly, that he had bought the monthly subscription so we could send as many messages as we needed to. We all thanked Cody, then split off in 4 separate directions and started hiking. My girlfriend, Harissa, had been pretty upset when I told her we were going to split up to look for Patrick, but we all felt like it would be the best way to cover as much ground as possible. The Park Service had told us they would send people out to look for Patrick only after his family filed a missing persons report. Patrick's mom was too busy trying to score meth to make that happen, so we decided to take matters into our own hands. The first morning was beautiful, and I told myself that I was stopping every hour to admire the scenery, not to catch my breath. By mid-afternoon, I felt like I had found my stride, and I was starting to enjoy myself. I felt a little weird, like I didn't really know what I was doing, but I kept telling myself that I was doing the right thing in coming out here. Cody, Tyler, Max, and I kept in touch as best we could without wearing down our batteries, letting each other know how far we had made it, and that none of us had found any signs of Patrick yet. I made the mistake of pushing myself to keep walking even as the shadows grew longer, and I wound up having to set up camp in the dark. I was frustrated and kept making small mistakes trying to put my little one-person tent up. I gave up and decided to look for firewood instead, promising myself I would plan my day better tomorrow so I would have time to set up my tent. I built my fire, cooked my dinner, then made the comfiest sleeping spot I could and curled up on my sleeping bag. I lay there staring up at the stars through the tree branches until exhaustion overtook me. I hadn't realized I'd fallen asleep until I woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee. I rolled over, getting ready to push my stiff body up so I could find somewhere to relieve myself, when I saw a dark shape hovering around the edge of my campsite. It looked like a Halloween decoration at first, as weird as that sounds. There was a vaguely human shape, but it was hunched and slightly more animalistic. I laid on my side staring at it until it melted back into the tree line and became just another shadow. I got up then, making sure to go in the opposite direction, and tried to convince myself that it was just a shadow, maybe some kind of animal. Some totally normal animal to find in the woods. With that, I managed to convince myself to go back to sleep, and I woke again to the first rays of sunlight poking me in the eye. The first thing I did was check my messages on my sat-nav device. Cody had sent us a message in the middle of the night about how creepy the woods were alone, and Max replied a few minutes before I woke up, saying he had felt like he was being watched all night. I remembered the strange shape I'd seen in the trees and felt a shiver work its way down my spine. It was probably just shared anxiety between the four of us, worrying about our missing friend. But it was still hard to shake the feeling that something was watching us, following us, and we didn't know what. I felt that cold drip of fear on my spine again and did my best to shake it off. The sun was warm and bright, and despite my sore muscles, I was looking forward to the day's hike. I packed my things, ate a protein bar, then sent a message to the group letting them know I was heading out and which direction I was going in. I got 3 messages back from the group with the directions they were going and a reminder from Cody not to kill our batteries. Zach sent a message back that said, "Shoot, should I stop using the sat-nav to torrent videos then?" Cody didn't send a reply back, but I knew he was rolling his eyes and laughing. I started walking, and despite my fatigue and nerves, I couldn't help but notice how beautiful it was. The pale yellow sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a patchwork of green and yellow onto the rocks and path in front of me. It was actually kind of mesmerizing, and I found myself beginning to understand why Hank and Patrick liked it out here so much. Thinking about my foster dad reminded me I had already lost one person, and it gave me renewed energy to find my best friend. Patrick had been there for me in the years since losing my foster dad, and I knew I couldn't have made it this far without him. An idea occurred to me and I stopped walking, then pulled out my phone and my sat-nav. I pulled up the messages I had been getting from Patrick and sent a message to his sat-nav number. I knew it was unlikely I would get anything back, but I really felt like I could sense his presence in the forest. I slid my technology back into my pack and kept walking, picking up my pace as I did. We had a lot of ground to cover, and I knew 4 people weren't enough for a search party, but we had to try. I hiked for hours, sometimes going off trail so I could explore an area I thought Patrick would have liked, other times stopping and just calling out his name. Around mid-afternoon, I stopped to make a real lunch rather than just tearing into another protein bar, and allowed myself a peek at my sat-nav. Nothing. I tried to swallow my disappointment along with my flavorless freeze-dried food. I ate and got back on the trail, but doubt had started to creep in. We were probably never going to find Patrick, and I knew that. Grand Teton was huge, wild, and kind of dangerous. If we hadn't heard from him in a few weeks, we were probably never going to hear from again. I found a place to make camp, early enough this time so I could put my tent up, and began to settle in, trying not to plan my best friend's funeral in my head as I did. I made my fire and settled in, wishing I had Netflix to take my mind off things. I woke up again in the middle of the night to the same shadow hovering over my campsite. This time it was holding something that cast a light on its face. The light was dim, like it was holding an old Game Boy just barely lit up in the darkness, so I couldn't make out the features very well, but I could tell it had an almost human shape. I say almost human because every detail I could make out was just a little wrong. The eyes glinted like an animal, seeming to open and close independently of each other. The mouth seemed to stretch back too far, and the body was hunched and straight in all the wrong places. But for some reason, I didn't feel at all threatened by it. Whatever I was looking at didn't seem to mean me any harm. It stared at me for what seemed like a long time. Then it was gone. Once again, I drifted off into a fitful sleep. That night, my dreams were stranger than usual. I found myself walking through the woods trying to find pieces of myself. Every time I would find one piece, an arm, a hand, I would realize I was missing something else. It was like trying to hold water in a sieve. I couldn't seem to keep myself in one piece. When I woke up in the morning, it was with the distinct feeling that I had lost something I would never find again. As I got ready, I found myself checking my pack and pockets over and over, convinced something important was missing. I finally managed to convince myself I had everything I had started out with and began breaking down my campsite. Before I left, I sent a message out to the group and realized I had received a message in the middle of the night. It was from Patrick. I sat down hard on the ground as I opened it, feeling some strange mix between hope and fear fluttering around inside me. But the message was nonsense. It was long, as if someone had been trying to send me a message but couldn't quite remember how to make words with the keypad. At the very end were just a bunch of hand-typed emoticons, like we all had to use back in the early days of cell phones, including one Patrick had taught me back in middle school. It was a complicated, shrugging, smirking emoji that I had never been able to get the hang of, and he would text it to me all the time to mess with me. I stared at the message in horror. I had no idea who or what had sent it to me, but I was reminded with an awful jolt of fear of the creature that had been watching me the night before with its face half lit up. I held the sat-nav device under my hand and studied the faint light it emitted. Something had Patrick's sat-nav, and it was following me. I spent the first 3 hours of my day debating whether or not I should message the rest of the group. I wanted them to know what had happened, but there didn't seem to be any way to express what I thought was happening without sounding like I had lost my mind. As the day wore on, I started to doubt myself more and more. I must have just dreamed the mystery figure, and maybe the text I got from Patrick was just a jumbled mess of messages he had attempted to send me that had failed to go through. It was a lame explanation, even for me, but it was all I had, and I desperately needed something that felt more logical than some creepy shadow figure sending me nonsense messages from my missing best friend's phone. That night, I sent a message out to the group that said, "Hey guys, I've got a bad feeling about Pat. I got a weird message from his device today. It seems like maybe an animal got a hold of it or something." Lame reasoning, but the best I could come up with. I didn't want to leave the other guys in the dark about the message in case it meant something, but I also didn't want to tell them I was pretty sure I had gotten the message from a shadow creature that was stalking me. Slowly over the course of the next hour, replies trickled in. The guys agreed that it was probably hopeless and time for us to call it quits on our search. After an hour of back and forth, we agreed to give it 2 more nights. If we didn't find any sign of him tomorrow, then we would turn around the next day. I agreed that was fair enough, even though the thought of giving up made me feel sick to my stomach. I made my campsite, sent a message to Patrick letting him know we were still looking for him, then made dinner and went to bed. I had more dreams of wandering through the woods, but this time the forest was like a house of mirrors. I kept running into reflections that seemed to be showing me bizarre creatures instead of myself. Occasionally, I would see a glimpse of myself, but wrong. Like all my features were there, but in the wrong places. I woke up feeling worse than ever, then realized how late in the day it was. Dark storm clouds had gathered overnight, so instead of waking up to the morning sun, I had slept in. I rushed to gather up my things and break down my campsite as I cursed at myself for not using every available minute to search for my friend. I checked my device and saw that the other guys had experienced the same problem and were sharing their concerns about the storm clouds. Cody suggested calling it early, saying he didn't like the look of those clouds, but I insisted we keep going. Looking back, I was so desperate to find Patrick, I guess I was willing to risk our lives to do it. The other guys agreed, and we kept hiking, but as the day wore on, the storm clouds got thicker and darker. By mid-afternoon, a steady rain had begun, and by evening it was pitch dark. I realized too late now that we should have turned around that morning. I sent a message to the group saying I was worried about flooding and going to turn around now to see how far back I could make it, and the rest of the group agreed. We were too far up the mountain to feel safe now, but I hoped I could at least make some good progress. Besides, hiking felt safer than sleeping in the downpour. It wasn't long before my sat-nav lit up with a warning about flash flooding, and I remembered that it could contact emergency services. I called and let them know my friends and I were about to be caught in the flood, and they promised to send out a helicopter. On a whim, I said, "There's 5 of us. Me, a guy named Cody, a guy named Zach, a guy named Max, and my best friend Patrick." The operator promised to look for all of us, and I hung up feeling relieved. It was a little white lie, mostly true, and maybe now someone would actually take Patrick's disappearance seriously. I kept hiking, but by now the rain was coming down in violent, angry torrents. In my desire to get to safety, I began moving too recklessly, and before I knew it, I had lost my footing, and I was swept away by a tide of water that seemed to come from nowhere. I felt my body being buffeted by the wind and water, yanked left and right, and beaten against anything I came in contact with. I knew enough about flash floods. I was dead. But then I felt something wrap itself around me, strong arms sliding beneath my armpits, something bony against my back. And then I was lying on dry, okay, not so dry earth, coughing up water and gasping for air. I looked up and saw Cody 100 yards away from me, also lying on his side and coughing up water. I turned around and saw Zach a little further away, and Max just past him and to the right. Somehow, by some miracle, all 3 of us had made it to the same point at the same time. We were all in our own little safe spots, out of reach of the water. I ran to Cody first and made sure he was okay, then the 2 of us picked our way carefully across the rocks until we made it to Max and Zach. We huddled there together for the rest of the night, trying to make sense of what had happened. Zach had nearly stumbled off a small cliff he wasn't able to see in the torrent of rain, but a mystery hand had pulled him back. When he got a sense of where he was nowhere close to where he thought he had been when he fell. Max shared a similar story. He had gotten knocked over by a falling tree branch, but someone had pulled it off him and walked him to safety, staying just outside his line of sight the entire time. Cody had also been swept away by the current, and someone had pulled him from the water too. None of us had gotten a good look at our rescuer, but somehow they had managed to get us all to a safe place. And for most of us, we seemed to be miles away from where we had been when we fell. Dawn was just beginning to challenge the darkness of the clouds when rescuers found us. They took us to a hospital, where we all got checked out to make sure we were fine. Aside from some bruises, no one was seriously hurt. They apologized for not finding Patrick along with us and said that unfortunately he probably died in the flash flood if he was out there at all. I checked my sat-nav again before leaving the hospital and saw that one message had come through since we were rescued. I showed the message to the other guys. It had come from Patrick's device, and all it said was, FRINs. I still don't know how to explain it. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. People mysteriously survive dangerous stuff all the time. But I can't shake the feeling that Patrick is still out there, and maybe he was the reason we survived. A few days later, I got a call from the park services. They told me they had recovered Patrick's cell phone, which they found abandoned deep in the forest. They were able to pull some voice notes from it, and I was listed as one of his emergency contacts. I wasn't sure if I even wanted to hear them. Part of me wanted to forget the whole experience, to leave it behind. But curiosity, or maybe loyalty to my friend, pushed me to listen. They sent me the files in an email. It was late afternoon when I finally settled into my small living room, the kind of quiet that only comes with isolation filling the space. I stared at my laptop screen for a long time, hesitating. I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing on me. Finally, I clicked on the first audio file. I plugged my headphones in, taking a deep breath, half hoping that what I was about to hear would bring some kind of closure. The first audio file opened, and as soon as I heard Patrick's voice, it filled me with a sense of hope. Like maybe Patrick's words could help me understand what really happened. His voice was steady at first, full of enthusiasm, talking about the adventure. But as I continued listening, I could hear it shift from confidence to confusion, then to something I could only describe as acceptance. There was a heaviness in his words that felt almost tangible, like he knew something was coming but couldn't articulate it. Here's what he said. June 29th. I've always wanted to do a massive solo hiking trip. I see these videos all the time from people who backpack across the United States or through the whole Rockies or something. It's amazing, and I've always wanted to do it myself. I decided to give it a shot, but starting out in Grand Teton. People hike through there all the time, and while there are definitely some dangers, it seemed like a decent place to get started. Don't get me wrong, I've done all sorts of solo camping and hiking before, so it's not like I'm brand new and trying to start out on hard mode. I gathered up my supplies, told my friends I would be in touch, and then I was off. I took 3 months off work. You have no idea how hard it was to swing that. And asked my sister to stay in my apartment until I got back. She's been wanting to move out on her own for a while, so I figured this would be a good way for her to see what living alone is like. The first week was awesome. I went at whatever pace felt right, mostly trying to push myself to walk as far as possible, but occasionally just going at a leisurely speed that allowed me to take in my surroundings. Anyone who says Wyoming is ugly has never been to the right part of Wyoming. It may not be Washington, mostly trees and mountains, but it's nice. Things started to get weird out here, though. At first, when I would run into other hikers, they were friendly, happy-go-lucky people. But the longer I've been out here, the more suspicious everyone seems to get. I keep hearing other hikers talking about something in the woods and warning each other to be careful. I'm keeping my eye out for anything dangerous and trying to keep in touch with my friends. July 1st. There was something in my campsite last night. I don't know what, but I woke up and found footprints all over the place. They look almost human, like I would imagine Bigfoot's tracks would look, although they aren't huge. They were going back and forth like someone was dancing. I also found trash, like a raccoon had been raiding other people's campsites and dragging its treasures over to mine. I found another couple who were hiking and asked if they noticed anything weird around their campground. They said there were footprints and something had gotten into their food. I suggested bears, but they said they think it's a homeless person. I guess that makes sense. July 8th. I know this is going to sound weird, but I swear the days are getting longer. I don't really know how to explain it, but each day seems to be stretching out farther and farther. Sometimes by the time I go to sleep at night, I feel like I've been up for weeks. I and other hikers are still reporting the weird tracks around our campsite. Last night I saw that they went around and around my tent, but I didn't wake up in the night. I sent a message to Landon letting him know what's going on. July 11th. No weird tracks around my campsite last night. I'm thinking it really was a homeless person. Hopefully they're doing okay. It can be dangerous out here if you don't know what you're doing. July 15th, I'm having weird dreams. Actually, I've been having the same 3 weird dreams over and over. In the first dream, I'm walking through the forest, picking up pieces of myself. And I don't mean stuff from my pack, I mean like fingers and eyeballs. I'll be walking along feeling like I lost something important, and then I'll see my foot on the path. I'll race forward and grab it, but as soon as I have it, I realize I'm missing something else. I always wake up feeling like I'm missing some crucial piece of myself. In the second dream, I'm walking through a house of mirrors. Unlike a normal house of mirrors, this one looks like the forest, but I can tell it's not, if that makes sense. Like if you decorated a house of mirrors to look like one of those weird jungle restaurants my buddy Max is always wanting to go to. Every time I look in one of the mirrors, it's like it's showing me someone else. I see other hikers I've run into out here, but they always look startled or terrified. Sometimes I see myself, but all my features are in the wrong places. At one point I saw myself and I looked perfectly normal, except I was missing my eyes. In the space where they should have been, there was nothing. Then I lifted my hands and showed that I was holding my eyeballs, one in each hand. In the third dream, I'm a tree in the forest. I can feel myself growing up from a sapling, watching as hikers and animals pass me by. Then my physical self approaches my tree self. Tell me how to describe a dream without sounding insane. And my physical body lays down at the roots of the tree. The roots come up from the ground and wrap around my body, pulling me into the earth to suffocate. But instead of feeling panic, I just feel peace. Every time I wake up from the third dream, I feel kind of sad. Like something precious was taken away from me. I know that sounds weird, but it makes me think that just being a tree in the woods might be really nice. July 22nd, I lost something on the trail. I'm not entirely sure what I lost, but my pack feels too light and I know I must have dropped something. Damn it, I'm going to have to retrace all my steps until I find it. July 24th. I'm not sure why, but people have gotten so much less friendly out here. I decided to retrace my steps at least for a day or two to see if I can find what I lost. Whenever I pass other hikers, they either act like they can't see me or they skirt around me. I'm sure I look kind of homeless now, after more than a month of not shaving or getting my hair cut or taking a shower. But it still hurts my feelings. July 29th. I gave up looking for it yesterday. I hiked the same trails over and over, asking everyone I came across if they found something I dropped. I've gone over the inventory in my pack a dozen times a day, but I still can't pinpoint exactly what's missing. I know something is, but I'm not sure what. I have to stop thinking about it. If I keep obsessing over whatever it was I lost, I'll go insane. August 8th. I'm more comfortable sleeping without a tent, I realized. It just makes me feel so much closer to nature. I could stay out here forever. August 12th. I found out what I lost. I lost my reflection. It's gone. August 12th, I feel really clear-headed for the first time in a while. It feels great to be out here. August 15th. Other hikers don't see me. Other hikers don't talk to me. Other hikers don't see the forest. Other hikers don't talk to the forest. I am forest. They are hiker. November 5th, Landon, Max, Cody, Zach. North, south, east, west. Landon, Max, Cody, Zach. Northeast, southwest, due west, due east. Landon, Max, Cody, Zach. North, southeast, southwest, northwest. Landon, Max, Cody, Zach. Drowned, crushed, drowned, fell. November 7th, safe, far, I ends. Roots, my roots, safe. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. I learned a secret about the Bermuda Triangle, but I wish I hadn't. Ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated with the ocean. My mom hated it. She used to tell me all the time. If God intended for us to know about the ocean, he wouldn't have put so many obstacles between us and the bottom of it. I thought that was a bit reductionist, but when I insisted on studying biological oceanography and ocean engineering, she was as supportive as she could possibly be. College was the best time in my life. I loved my studies. My mom and I even bonded over it as she let me tell her all about what I was learning about the ocean. Even though she didn't love the field I chose, she still pitched in for my education and encouraged me to live at home until I was done. She was my biggest supporter. 2 weeks after I graduated college, my dad died, and with his death, my mom seemed to lose all her will to live. She tried to hold on for me, but every day I could see the light slipping from her eyes a little more. She died the day after my interview for my dream job, and to this day I'm convinced she did that on purpose. She knew her time was coming, and she waited so I wouldn't miss my interview. My friends always tell me that's a little morbid, but when I light candles for my mom's spirit, I can feel her there with me, and I know it's true. Anyway, I got the call with the job offer a few days after her funeral. Another small blessing that I knew came from her. And despite wanting to just lay down and give up on everything, I accepted the job. I was still heartbroken about losing both of my parents within a few months of each other, but the job was everything I had dreamed and more. After a few years, I was given the opportunity to join a team that was researching previously unexplored parts of the ocean. I got assigned to the coolest place ever, the Bermuda Triangle. I know. We all grew up hearing stories about the Bermuda Triangle, and most of them can be explained by science and weather patterns. But the stories that can't be explained by science, unfortunately, I can offer you an explanation for. Turns out my mom was right. Sometimes obstacles are there for a reason. The first few weeks of our research expedition were exciting. We had a place we were staying in Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. But since that's still a good 640 miles from our research site, we also had a fairly nice boat we were staying on, and the team got funds for a submarine. I won't bore you with all the scientific details of our expedition, but after about 2 months, we were granted permission to send 4 people into the Bermuda Triangle in a submarine. Our team lead decided she would select 3 people to go with her. And out of our 11-person team, we knew there would be a lot of disappointed people. She said she would give us her decision individually to avoid the awkwardness for everyone who wasn't selected. I was a bundle of nerves for the whole week it took her to decide, but on a bright, beautiful Sunday morning, Marnie found me in my bunk and told me I had been selected. To be honest, a part of me knew deep down that I was going to be picked. There was no way all of these things would have lined up so perfectly just for me to be left behind while someone else went on the submarine trip. As it turns out, we would all be better off if someone else had been selected. 3 days later, we were ready to take the submarine down to the ocean floor. The people in our group were myself, Marnie, an older man named Jacob, a guy about my age named Evan, and the 90-person crew running the submarine. We all had our hopes for what we would discover, but I think everyone was just elated to be a part of something so big. The first few days in the submarine were mostly spent getting our bearings, charting, mapping, and getting used to being so deep underwater. After that, we were able to use some pretty high-tech equipment that looked a lot like the suits astronauts wear to actually leave the submarine. I still lay awake at night and think about what that was like. The ocean was dark. It reminded me of fog, actually. The way you can see up to a certain point before it all blurs into one meaningless color. Only instead of fog, we were in an inky darkness all the time. I could see a few feet in front of me at any given moment, the wonders of the ocean hidden behind a cold, wet, dark veil, all there for me and my team to uncover. After a couple days of collecting samples and specimens, Jacob and I made a huge discovery. Caught between a rock and the ocean floor was a scuba suit in a design neither of us had ever seen before. Our suits, top-of-the-line equipment not currently available to the public, looked a lot like spacesuits. This one looked like a toddler had tried to copy what we were wearing, but lacked the ability to really do it justice. The hands looked like mittens, almost exactly the way a small child would think to draw them. The helmet was oddly oblong and looked like a large bucket with holes cut out for the eyes and mouth. The eye and mouth holes were covered with glass, and the top of the helmet was rounded instead of flat like a bucket would be, giving it an odd, misshapen appearance. The body was misshapen as well, with a barrel-like torso and uneven arms and legs. While I couldn't tell what the helmet was made from, it was clear that the body seemed to be made out of leather. The helmet and body almost seemed suctioned or glued together. There was no zipper, no buttons, no way I could see to dismantle it in order to put it on. More importantly, it was clear the suit was very old, but it showed none of the signs of damage that something like that should have after sitting at the bottom of the ocean for so long. Jacob and I glanced at each other, then rushed toward the strange sight as if we were both thinking the same thing. We worked together to move the rock off it, then cleared the debris that had gathered around the suit, mostly fish bones and small carcasses. We did so in complete silence, but despite the lack of words, I knew we were both beyond excited. Whatever this was, we were on the cusp of an incredible discovery. We freed the strange-looking diver's suit and carried it back to the submarine. An hour later, Jacob and I stood with the rest of the crew. Everyone hovered around the table we had placed it on. We had debated for a while if we thought it would hold up, bringing it out of the water and into a strange atmosphere. And Marnie logically decided we needed to resurface as quickly as possible, so we could get the suit to a temperature and moisture-controlled storage facility. She told the submarine captain, and he said he would prepare us to resurface first thing on the following day. In the meantime, Marnie told us to work our asses off to get as much done as possible before departure. She told us that if the submarine went back down, she would probably give other people on the team the opportunity to be on the crew. That was disappointing, but I agreed it was only fair. We put the suit in the storage room we had reserved for samples, locked the door, and went back to work. That night was when the first unusual thing occurred. Around 1 a.m, I woke up to piercing shrieks and raced out of my bunk into the hallway. One of the crew members, Rodriguez, I think, was kneeling on the floor, clutching his head and screaming. The captain knelt next to him, trying to talk over the sound of his screams, but all we could hear was Rodriguez repeating over and over, "The eyes. It's eyes." Nobody knew what that meant, but his fear was both palpable and contagious. The captain assured us that sometimes people struggle with being underwater for very long, and Rodriguez would get the best medical and psychiatric care possible once we got back to the surface. He insisted we all go back to bed, and everyone complied, slinking off to our bunks like a bunch of chastised children. The first thing I did in the morning was go back to the captain and ask if Rodriguez was okay. The captain smiled in greeting and assured me that Rodriguez was a bit sick, but they were sure he would be just fine. I thanked him, and as I was leaving, I heard him call out, "If God wanted us to explore the ocean, we would have gills." It was my mom's favorite joke. Every time I talked about new advances in oceanic technology, she would say that to me with a smile and a pat on the arm. I turned around and stared at the captain. I said, "What was that?" He was already facing away from me and glanced back over his shoulder. "Sorry, what?" I knew my face was tight, my voice reflecting my nerves. "What did you say? As I was walking away, you said something about exploring the ocean." He gave me a concerned look. "Are you okay, Doctor Williams?" I didn't say anything. I nodded, every muscle in my body feeling like a tense rubber band. Yes, I'm fine, thank you." I guess I was just lost in my thoughts. As I walked out, he muttered, "Can't have another crazy on my ship." I made my way back to the sample room, which was once again unlocked, and joined Marnie where she stood next to the area we had reserved just for the diving suit. Marnie had sent Evan out after Jacob and I came back to chip some pieces off the rock that had pinned the diving suit to the ocean floor. And he had also collected some bits of detritus around the area as well, like fish bones and other carcasses. I walked over and said, "Have you had a chance to crack the suit open?" Marnie smirked, knowing I was messing around, and said, "Right, because I want to be the ocean version of the guy who destroyed the city of Troy. No, but there's the craziest thing." I lifted an eyebrow and Marnie went on, "I don't think there's a body in here." I looked over at the diving suit and felt a strange pang of fear shoot through me. "How did it get down there then?" Marnie shrugged, unbothered. "Maybe it dropped off a boat or something. We might never get an answer to that, but we can do some testing on it to see when it was made and what it's made from." I scooted away from the wetsuit, the room feeling claustrophobic now. "Have you had a chance to run any tests, or are you waiting until we resurface?" Marnie started to answer when the door opened and a sheepish-looking crew member walked in. He said, "Doctors, I'm sorry to bother you, but I have some bad news. We aren't going to be able to resurface today after all. We're experiencing serious technical issues." Marnie and I both looked at each other, mirroring the panic on each other's faces, and in her best stern voice, she said, "Define serious issues." The crew member glanced over his shoulder as if he was waiting for someone to step in and take over for him. Then he replied, "I'll let you have that conversation with the captain. All he told me to pass along was that we're experiencing some strange weather that's interfering with the radar, and he doesn't feel safe resurfacing until it passes. He can lower us back to the ocean floor so you can continue your research, though." Marnie sighed and passed a hand over her face, looking weary. "Yes, tell him that would be good, and please update us at your earliest convenience." She stressed the word earliest with a look on her face that always made lab assistants duck their heads and promise to do whatever she asked. The crew member was no different, and he turned to flee quickly. Before he could escape, I said, "Wait, what about Rodriguez? Is he going to be okay?" The crew member went pale and said, We don't know. Captain Cameron says." He stopped and squared his shoulders back. "He'll be fine. We'll get back to the surface as soon as we're able, and in the meantime, he's fine in Med Bay." I let him run out then, and turned to Marnie, who had already turned her own attention back to the samples. Before I could ask her thoughts on what was happening, she started giving me instructions, and I ran over to help her with the tests. If we had to be stuck underwater, we might as well be productive. While the equipment we had on the sub was good, it wasn't the equipment we needed to safely test the material of the suit, so we focused on analyzing the other specimens we took from the site instead. As we worked, I felt like the suit was a third person in the room, watching and judging silently as we worked. Jacob and Evan joined us at some point, and the four of us made plans for how we would use our time until the sub could resurface. Marnie was mostly frustrated that we didn't have a timeline. She wanted to map out as much time as possible, but hesitated to do that if she didn't know how much time we had. Jacob and I encouraged her to schedule our days as if we were going to be staying for the full 5 days we would have had left, and promised to do all her top priority items first. With that settled, we went to the mess hall for dinner. When we got there, I noticed that there seemed to be fewer people than usual. Rodriguez was missing, obviously, but I also noticed one of the female crew members I had started bonding with was gone too. I grabbed my food and sat down across from someone I had seen talking with her before. I smiled and said, "Hi, I'm Mara Williams, one of the researchers. Do you know where Claire Mason is?" The crew member, I thought his name was Reynolds, gave me a weird look, then shook his head, stood, and left his half-eaten tray of food where it was. I watched Reynolds walk away, feeling equal parts confused and irritated. A few minutes later, Marnie walked over and grabbed my arm. In a harsh whisper, she said, "You need to come with me." I stepped out into the hallway, feeling anxiety wringing my stomach like a dish rag. Marnie didn't say anything, but we walked down the hall until we reached sick bay. Once we got there, Captain Cameron stepped out with a concerned look on his face. I had last spoken with him that morning, and in that time it was as if he had aged 20 years. He waited for us to step inside, then shut the door and said in a hushed voice, "Thank you both for coming. I'm sorry to be treating this so clandestine, but I have some concerns. I think you'll understand." He took a deep breath before continuing. "We seem to be having a problem with psychosis on board. You both saw what happened with Rodriguez. In the last 24 hours, we've had 2 more crew members experience the same thing. That may not sound like a lot, but when you're on a machine like this one, you need every person to be in the best health possible." He stepped aside and we saw Rodriguez, Claire, and another crew member I thought was named Anderson, all laying in their beds. They were asleep. They seemed peaceful. Cameron continued, "They're sedated. Every time they wake up, they start screaming again. And we want to keep this quiet from as many people as possible. I told the crew we believe there's a bout of mono going around, and to be cautious and stay out of sick bay. It's not a good solution, but it's what we have right now. I need you two to see if you can figure out what's going on." Marnie lifted an eyebrow and put one hand on her hip. "We're not equipped for that, Captain. Neither of us have a degree in medicine or psychology. Don't you have a doctor on board?" Captain Cameron gave her a look that I can only describe as pure desperation. "Our medic isn't equipped for this either, and we don't have a psychologist for this expedition because it was supposed to be a short one. Please just do blood tests, something. Work with our medic and use any of his equipment that you need to. Figure out what's going on." Captain Cameron left, and I turned to Marnie and said, "This all started the night after we found the diving suit. Do you think we brought some kind of bacteria into the ship that's making people sick?" Marnie winced. "Shit. I hope not, but maybe we did. I'll go take a sample from it to see if there's anything weird. You go finish your dinner." She started to leave, then stopped. "And Mara, do not speak a word of this to anyone. We want to keep this quiet." I sulked back to the mess hall, feeling like my trip of a lifetime was slowly blossoming into a nightmare. I finished my food, then went back to sickbay to check in with Marnie. She wasn't there, and the medic was back, but he hadn't seen her either. Concerned now, I went back to the storage room. Sitting on the floor in the corner of the room was Marnie, tears flooding her cheeks, her eyes looking hollow and glassy. I ran to her side. Marnie, are you okay? What's going on?" She didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there like a shell of a person. I ran from the room to the sick bay and told the medic what was going on, then went to the control room to look for the captain. When I told him what happened to Marnie and what our suspicions were, his face grew hard. He said, "Lock the room you've got that thing in and don't let anyone touch it. If one more person gets sick, I'm making you and your team get rid of it. And I'll make you bleach the entire storage room to make sure no one else gets sick." I apologized for all the trouble, agreed to his conditions, and left to update Evan and Jacob. I know Marnie told me not to, but with her out of commission, I needed as much support from the rest of our team as possible. When I got to the men's bunk area, Evan and Jacob were both there looking tense. They motioned me inside and we huddled together on Jacob's bed. Jacob leaned in and whispered, "About 20 minutes after you and Marnie left, we heard more screaming. Rugen this time, he was in the hallway near the storage room clutching his eyes and..." Jacob hesitated as if he wasn't sure how to explain it. He was begging for forgiveness. I don't know what about or to whom, but he kept saying, "I didn't mean to, I'm sorry," over and over. Evan took in a shaky breath and said, "We tried to help, but the person you were sitting with before Marnie grabbed you, I think his name is Reynolds. He pushed us away and told us not to say anything." My mind reeled. It seemed like something about the suit really was making people sick. Maybe Rugen had gone into the storage room for some reason. Or maybe an even worse thought, the bacteria on the suit that was causing this had migrated from the storage room somehow. An image popped into my head of invisible bacteria crawling along the floor, lit by a black light showing it moving in waves towards new victims. I looked up at my two teammates and said, "Cameron, Marnie, and I think the diving suit we found might have something to do with all this, like maybe there's some kind of bacteria on it causing all this. And with Marnie in sick bay now too, I think we may be right." We all stared at each other for a long time before Jacob said, "This is bad." Evan and I nodded our agreement. Then Evan asked, "Well, now what do we do? We can't get rid of the suit. Who knows what kind of discoveries we can make with it? And," he cast his face down, "and this discovery could put all of our names on the map, you know. We could be something." Jacob put a fatherly hand on Evan's arm. "Safety is far more important, Evan. Don't sacrifice lives to have your name on a plaque in some museum." He turned back to me and said, "I think we need to put the diving suit back in the ocean, Mara. Some things weren't meant to be found." I looked back and forth between Evan and Jacob, feeling the weight of being the tiebreaker resting on me like an anchor. Finally, I made the worst mistake of my life. I said, "I think we should try to stop whatever this is before we put the diving suit back. We came all this way, and I think it's what Marnie would want." I could tell Jacob wanted to argue with me more, but when I mentioned Marnie, he closed his mouth and lowered his eyes. We agreed to meet in the storage room in an hour to try and find a way to keep the suit quarantined so no one else would get sick. The running theory was that some kind of bacteria was causing encephalitis, swelling in the brain, that was causing hallucinations and catatonia. We didn't have the right tools on board to properly diagnose them, but it was a good place to start. The three of us split up to look for supplies that might help. Evan left to look for cleaning supplies. I went to med bay to get masks and gloves. And Jacob simply said he had an idea and ran off on his own. We had agreed to meet up outside the men's quarters again, which were, thankfully, on the other side of the building from the storage room. A little after 9, I rejoined Jacob in the hallway. When he saw me, he sighed and said, "I knew it. I have a bad feeling." I lifted an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He gestured around us vaguely. "Evan isn't here. I haven't seen him since we parted ways, and finding cleaning supplies shouldn't have taken very long." I shook my head and handed him the gloves and mask. "Throw these on and let's go check." Jacob sighed again. "I had hoped to stay away from that area until we can deal with this, but all right. Let's go." We walked to the storage room together, and when we got there, Jacob pulled me gently away from the door so he could enter first. When we walked in, neither of us were surprised to see Evan laying on the floor, hands over his head, sobbing. Jacob and I walked over and dragged Evan to his feet and carried him to sick bay. When we got there, we found a horrible sight. Somehow, in the last hour, 10 more crew members had gotten sick. We had started with a smaller crew, around 90 crew members, 30 people per shift, 3 shifts if I remembered correctly. Since we were a smaller sub, we didn't need as many people. We were now down 15 people, including Marnie and Evan. We were quickly turning into a skeleton crew, and while I didn't know very much about submarines, I had a feeling that was really bad. After we dropped Evan off, Jacob and I went to find Captain Cameron. We opened the sickbay door, and before I could process what I was seeing, Jacob had pushed me to the floor and slammed the door shut. Walking down the hallway was the diving suit. It slumped and lurched as though only one part of it at a time was able to hold itself up. We watched through the port window in the door as a crew member came around the corner and ran into the diving suit. The man smirked as though he thought someone was playing a prank on him and looked into the eyes of the mask. His face fell, his eyes widened, and he began sobbing. "I tried. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to let her drown. I was only a kid." He continued to sob, curling up into a ball on the floor as the diving suit continued to move. Jacob pulled me away from the window and placed his back to the door, blocking the port. We stared at each other in silence for a long time before he said, "Okay, this is bad and hard to believe." I nodded, feeling panic wrapping its cold, clammy hands around my throat. "What's happening? Is someone in the suit?" Jacob took slow, steady breaths, and I did my best to copy him. After a few minutes, he said, "I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think we can explain this." He turned and looked out the window again and took a deep breath. "We need to get back to the men's bunk. I grabbed our wetsuits and I think we'll need them." I was able to manage a small smile. Jacob was a good person to have on my team. We made our way out of the medbay, both of us shielding our eyes with our hands to avoid looking directly at the eyes of the suit. As much as I wanted to believe there was some logical answer, it seemed like people were having breakdowns only after looking in its eyes. We moved slowly, taking small, careful steps as we walked down the hallway. We could hear more screams echoing around the ship. They seemed to be coming from the other side of the ship, which was good, but it wouldn't be hard for the creature to catch up with us. We finally got to the bunk room and Jacob threw the door open, both of us barreling inside quickly, and we collapsed to the floor in a relieved heap. Jacob was breathing heavily, his face red, and I was worried he might have a heart attack. I found a bottle of water and passed it to him, then waited for him to recover. Finally, his breathing steadied and he nodded to me gratefully, then pointed across the room to where 3 diving suits sat on his bunk. I rushed forward and carried his over first, then grabbed my own and put it on. Once we were both fully suited up, I turned to Jacob and asked, "What now?" He gave me a stern look and said, "We have to get that thing off this ship. It's too risky to try and contain it." I felt the words like a deep blow and hung my head with shame. "You're right. I'm sorry." Jacob put his hand on my shoulder and gave me a tight smile. "We'll make this right. Don't worry about it too much." We both put our helmets on and stepped into the hallway. Jacob carried the body of the 3rd diving suit. I carried the helmet, and we made our way towards the control room, hoping Captain Cameron would be in there. The plan was to find Captain Cameron and get the word out around the ship that the thing could only hurt you if you looked into its eyes. We still weren't entirely sure what happened if you looked at it, but what we had seen so far was disturbing enough that neither of us wanted to try. I followed Jacob through the ship as he led us away from the screams, taking a more circuitous route to the control room as we avoided the shambling creature. When we arrived at the control room, Captain Cameron beckoned us in with a relieved look on his face. There were 11 crew members crammed into the small control room, and once we joined them, we were officially at capacity. We handed Captain Cameron the diving suit and explained the plan. He nodded, looking grim, and said, "That's better than risking anyone else's safety. How about I lead the creature towards the exit hatch as a distraction? You two just get over there safely and wait. Novak will watch the cameras in there and release the hatch once you 3 and the creature are safely inside." He gave us a pitying look. "I wish I didn't have to put you two in so much danger, but I don't see another option." Jacob and I both nodded resolutely, and I said, "It was my decision to bring this thing on board. I want to do what I can to make it right." Jacob put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I was involved with that decision too, and I second this one. Let's fix our mistake." Captain Cameron nodded, slipped into his diving suit, and the three of us stepped into the hallway. Jacob pointed to the right and then at Captain Cameron and nodded, then pointed to the left and gestured for me to follow him. We made our way down the hall towards the exit hatch. It was a sealed, pressure-controlled room that we could use to come and go for specimen collections. It was also exactly big enough to hold me, Jacob, and the creature. The few crew members we passed, we warned about what was happening and told them to hide somewhere safe and keep their heads down. I was starting to get nervous about the number of people we had sedated in medbay now. I don't know exactly how many people it takes to run a submarine, but with people dropping like flies, we had to be down to the wire. It wasn't long before we could hear scraping and shuffling coming down the hallway towards us. Captain Cameron rounded the corner, walking backwards with his head down. I glanced at Jacob and realized that if the thing pursued Cameron instead of us, we would never be able to get rid of it. I stepped away from the doorway and put myself between the creature and Captain Cameron. It didn't break stride, but when Cameron shuffled off to the side, it didn't change course to pursue him. I took over, walking backwards until I made my way into the isolation room. It shambled after me, but didn't stop when I put my back against the wall. It kept moving towards me until it had me pinned against the exit hatch. I kept my eyes down, but called out in a shrill voice laced with panic, "Jacob!" It's got me pinned. Just as I finished speaking, I felt a hard slam and glanced up just enough to see the creature reeling back before slamming its head into my helmet again. I watched in terror as a small spider web appeared in the glass. The creature put its hands on either side of the helmet to hold me in place just as Jacob was able to open the hatch behind us. Water rushed in and the creature was sucked out into the inky blackness. I had been able to get a good look at its hands before it was sucked out, and my stomach sank with dread. I was almost certain the suit was stitched from human skin. Even with that fresh panic, I was thrilled. Gravity and physics took care of the problem for us. Then a leathery hand reached back inside, wrapped itself around my ankle, and yanked me into the cold, dark ocean. Despite our depth, I could tell a storm was raging above us. The water would briefly light up with a lightning flash, revealing the tide battering everything in its path on the surface. I could only see the creature when the lightning would flash, but I could tell it was trying to get back to the submarine with me in tow. I fought and kicked, trying to get away, but the grip it had on me was inhuman, making all my struggles to get away seem meaningless. I was about ready to give up hope when I saw something come down on the creature's hand. Jacob had found a large rock and brought it down on the wrist part of the suit. It weakened the thing's grip just enough for me to get away, and I crawled backwards. In the momentary flashes of light, I could see Jacob fighting to get away, and I began searching for a rock too. I could see the spider web in my helmet growing, and I knew it wouldn't be very long before the pressure would break through and drown me. I found a medium-sized rock and fought against the water pressure to lift it. At some point, Jacob got free from the creature and helped me lift the rock, and together we carried it to where the creature was pinned by the rocks Jacob had been able to grab, struggling to free itself. We dropped the rock on its sternum as the lightning flashed, illuminating the thing's eyes just as I looked at them. Instantly, I was transported somewhere else. It was a sunny day in November, unusually warm and bright, and I walked down a hospital hallway. I was moving slowly, even though the nurses had called to tell me to hurry. I had been scared. I knew my mom was close, and I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I think part of me had hoped that if I never got to the room, I would never have to see her die. In a sense, I was right. I didn't have to watch her die because she had already passed when I got to the room. The nurse said if I had only been 1 minute earlier, I might have been able to say goodbye. In the memory, I sank to my knees in the doorway of my mom's room and began weeping. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around expecting to see a doctor, but instead I found myself looking right into the face of the diving suit. When we made eye contact, I was plunged again into a memory. This time I found myself kneeling at my dad's graveside as my mom sobbed beside me. It was the moment I had known I would lose my mom as well, one of the most painful days of my life. Again, I felt a hand on my shoulder, but this time I looked down, saw the human leather glove, and closed my eyes tight. I felt the creature turn me around, could feel its face inches from mine, but I refused to open my eyes. I could feel its rage radiating out from it as the hands moved from my shoulders to my sternum and began tearing my chest cavity open. The fingers sank into the soft skin and tissue between my breasts, biting through the meat of my flesh and wrapping around my bones. I could feel my ribcage bending and instinctively opened my eyes as I screamed. I was instantly plunged into another memory, this one from the time I had dealt with a stalker in college. But this time I was ready, and as soon as I felt the creature's hand on my shoulder, I bolted. I ran through the hallways of my old college until it faced into the green and gray of the cemetery my parents were buried in. I forced myself not to falter as I ran past my crying mother, the creature still shambling after me. The cemetery faded until it was replaced by the hospital, and I continued to run despite the burn in my chest and arms. I reminded myself it was a dream, a hallucination, but the terror remained. After what felt like years, the hallway faded into black, and I woke up. When I woke, I was in a regular hospital bed. Marnie was in the bed next to me, the curtain between us pulled back. Her face looked drawn and tired, older than I remembered. I took a moment to get my bearings, then pressed the call button for a nurse. A nurse wearing light purple scrubs walked in and lifted her eyebrows in surprise when she saw me. She said, "Oh my God, you're awake. This is incredible. Let me call your doctor." She rushed over and did something on the computer next to me, took my vitals, then ran from the room. She entered a few minutes later with a doctor in tow. They fussed over me for a while and gave me a little information, but I got the real story from Captain Cameron when he arrived. Captain Cameron, or Nate as he told me to call him, told me what had happened. He said that Jacob and I had just managed to pin the creature when I had fallen to my knees and begun sobbing. Jacob carried me back to the submarine and put me in the isolation chamber. When they opened it, I was there and catatonic, but Jacob wasn't. They weren't sure exactly what happened to him. They think he got grabbed by the creature, or maybe it was starting to get free and he ran back to stop it. Either way, Jacob had sacrificed his life to save mine. They hadn't been able to recover him. As soon as the creature was securely trapped, the storm had calmed and what was left of the crew had taken the submarine back to the surface. It was a hard journey. Apparently the storm had been a rough one, and on a skeleton crew it was extra hard. Apparently by the time we had gotten the creature off the ship, a total of 41 crewmates had been affected by it. Those of us who had been affected by the creature were taken to the hospital. And according to Nate, only a few of us woke up. I was among the first group to wake up, and even now, almost 6 years later, 8 of those people are still catatonic. I take responsibility for every single one of them. Marnie woke up eventually, and even though she said she didn't blame me for what happened, I was still removed from her team. That's okay, I'm not as interested in the ocean as I used to be. It turns out the ocean hides some secrets for a reason. Story 2 ends here. Now, we drift into Story 3. Be careful of the gray man when you walk along the train tracks. I used to live in the middle of backwoods, Pennsylvania, near a set of train tracks that ran through the woods. About once, maybe twice a week, I would hear the cry of a train horn splitting the air, always at a different time, but usually in the early morning or late evening. Sometimes it would even wake me from a dead sleep in the middle of the night. The little house I was renting was nice, at the very end of the cul-de-sac I lived in, and nestled back against a copse of trees. I wasn't entirely sure where the train tracks were, since they didn't run through town anywhere. but every time I was startled by the piercing cry, I thought it sounded like it was coming from the woods. The longer I lived in that little house, the more curious I got about the train. It probably sounds silly, but I've always liked trains, and even though I found the train horn startling, it was comforting in a weird way too. Every time it sounded, my ears would perk up and I would find myself tracing the sound as it moved, trying to pinpoint exactly where it came from and where it was going to. Finally, after about a year of that, I decided to take one of my days off and go look for the train tracks. I put a few bottles of water and some snacks in a backpack, put on my favorite pair of walking shoes, and practically skipped out the front door. It reminded me of being a kid. I didn't have the best home life, so it wasn't uncommon for me to pack a bag with enough provisions and comic books for the day before disappearing into the woods near our house. The woods were my escape, a place where I was safe from anger, yelling, and whatever my parents were throwing at each other that day. The forest was always calm and quiet. It made me feel safe, a feeling I couldn't always get at home. As I walked out my back door, I was reminded of that and how much I loved going for those walks as a kid. I'll admit I think I was expecting it to feel just as safe and magical now, but oh, how wrong I was. The forest itself was perfect. Silence punctuated only by the occasional bird call or rustle of the leaves brushing each other in the wind. It was an early spring day and the earth was spongy from recent rainfall. Dew dripped lazily from the green trees and sparkled on the tall grass as I walked through it. I made my way in the approximate direction I heard the train horn coming from. No real plan in mind for when I found it, just enjoying the breeze as it played with my hair. After about an hour, I finally found the train tracks and let out an excited whoop when they came into view. I raced forward like a little kid until I got right next to them. Then I began walking parallel to the tracks towards the mountains in the distance. My parents had always told me not to walk near train tracks, but I always wanted to follow them just once to see where I wound up. I followed the train tracks with a spring in my step, not noticing the sun sinking lower in the sky until the shadows grew long enough in front of me to blend together into one big pool of shadow. When I realized the sun was starting to go down, I stopped. I had been so lost in my thoughts and in finally fulfilling a childhood dream that I hadn't realized how late it was. I turned around and followed the train tracks, now at a quicker pace, until I reached the area I thought I had started from. I was still following the tracks when a figure emerged from the twilight on the path in front of me. I couldn't make out any details, but it seemed to be entirely gray, like a smudge of ash on the horizon growing steadily larger. Something about it really unsettled me, which I attributed to being a woman walking alone at night and seeing a stranger approach in the twilight. I veered off the tracks and made my way through the woods, emerging one neighborhood over from my own, and followed the streets back to my house, exhausted by the time I finally got there. I guess the stranger I saw on the tracks just left my mind. I didn't think about it at all for the rest of the night. And by the time I woke up the next day, I didn't even remember the vaguely unsettling encounter. It was a few weeks before I was able to make it back into the woods, but once another lazy day off came around, I packed my bag and escaped out the back door again. This time I left a bit earlier and went the other direction, towards what I assumed would be town, or maybe the next town over. I figured if I wandered to the next town by accident, I could always take a taxi home. This was before Uber was very popular. This time I took a can of spray paint and made a huge blue X on one of the trees that I could see from the tracks, so I would know where to head back into the woods to get home. I can't say for sure, but that decision might have saved my life. Again, time seemed to escape me, and before I knew it, it was late afternoon. I turned myself around and once again saw a smudge on the distant horizon, slowly approaching me and taking shape. This time there was enough light that I assumed it would be fine. Probably just another person wandering the train tracks to fill their empty Sunday afternoon. I kept walking, studying the trees surrounding the tracks on either side and admiring the giant purple mountains in front of me. I was startled from my reverie to realize that what had been nothing more than a smudge the last time I looked was now a person, just a few hundred yards away at most. I studied him as he approached. He seemed to be wearing a gray three-piece suit and gray shoes. His hair was gray too. He carried some kind of bag. It looked like a white trash bag, like one of the really heavy-duty ones, and it almost looked like it was filled with a liquid. It heaved and sagged, even though he carried it with such ease it could have been full of helium. I'll admit I didn't find him terrifying at first. It was a lovely afternoon. I was enjoying myself, and I've always been a really friendly person, so I was actually kind of excited that I might get to meet one of my neighbors out on my little walk. But when we were close enough for me to greet him, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was like all my senses shut down, and the only thing I was left with was this awful feeling of complete and total revulsion. Despite my vision going gray around the edges, I forced myself to keep walking, to get past the mystery person and closer to home. When we were right next to each other, all my senses returned to normal, and I noticed with a pang of fear and concern that even the man's skin was an ashy shade of gray. He continued to face forward, but his face seemed to melt and twist in my direction. All the features remained clear, but it was like the skin behind his face was melting, allowing the face itself to slip in my direction. He smiled at me, flashing gray teeth and the corner of a gray tongue peeking out of his mouth. Then he passed me, and I took a huge gulp of air, trying to calm my rioting stomach and nerves. Despite how badly I wanted to collapse to the earth and sob from whatever the hell that was, I forced myself to keep walking. Now more than ever, I just wanted to get home. After a few more minutes of walking, I managed to convince myself I had just imagined it. Or maybe the man had some kind of medical condition, and I was being unfair to judge him so harshly. As I successfully guilt-tripped myself into brushing off the weirdness, I noticed something on the horizon. A gray smudge that seemed to be getting closer to me. I debated it for a moment, then allowed myself to stop and turn around. There was nothing behind me, no traces of the strange gray man. I turned back around, and somehow he had managed to clear almost all the distance between us in the time it took me to turn around and back. I forced myself to keep walking, insisting to my now terrified brain that it was a coincidence, or I had spaced out for longer than I realized. As I got closer to the man, I forced a smile onto my own face, and with every ounce of courage I had asked, "Hey there, didn't we just see each other?" The look on his face didn't alter in the slightest, and neither did his stride as he approached. His mouth opened, and a voice as gray as a tombstone said, "We'll be seeing a lot of each other." The smile on his face stayed in place as mine faltered and crashed, and I picked up my pace to get past him as quickly as possible. As I did, a scent I hadn't noticed before wafted from his trash bag to my nose, and I had to resist the need, it was more than an urge, to vomit. What I smelled can only be described as death, plain and simple. It assaulted my nostrils and filled my mind with images of death and destruction, things I never could have pictured on my own. War-torn battlefields scattered with the flesh and blood of innocent people, bodies torn apart by animals, corpses swaying in the breeze, glassy eyes still begging for a savior, even though it was far too late. I gasped, pressing my hands to my mouth and nose, and hurried away. After a few minutes, the smell was gone, but the images and nausea remained. I couldn't understand what was wrong with me, and more than anything, I just wanted to get home, to safety in my comfiest chair. But I was still at least an hour away from my house. I glanced behind me again, let out a sigh of relief when I saw the gray man still walking away from me. then bit my tongue so hard I drew blood when I turned back and saw another gray smudge on the horizon. I whipped my head around again and saw he had disappeared. With resignation to my fate, I turned back around, already knowing what would be in front of me. Sure enough, the gray man with the gray smile was once again a few hundred yards in front of me. I bit back a little sob and looked around, wondering if I could get away from him somehow. Most of the area between the tracks and the trees was filled with grass and weeds that would go up at least to my waist. I would have been fine with that, except I'm terrified of ticks and didn't want to risk taking one home with me. As the stranger approached in the distance, I weighed my options. Pass the creepy old guy again or risk getting a parasite. It was a hard choice, but I finally took a deep breath and plunged into the tall grass. I glanced over at the tracks, almost against my will, and breathed a sigh of relief. He wasn't there. He must have done his little disappearing trick when I stepped off the tracks. I smiled in relief and faced front again, my heart shattering into violent little shards in my chest as I jumped backwards into the side. He was directly in front of me again with that same carved from stone, gray-toothed smile. He continued walking forward, eyes on the horizon, fist clenched around the trash bag in his hand. I stopped moving and simply stared at him as he passed, begging my mind to make sense of what was happening. Something in the bag sloshed, and the smell of blood and death overwhelmed me, making me feel sick all over again. I pressed my hands into my eyes, but when I opened them, the gray man was still there, walking away from me, his pace the same as ever. I forced myself to root to the spot and watch him walk away. I waited until the shadows grew longer and he was once again just a gray smudge on the horizon. When I turned back around, I was angry but not surprised to see the gray smear in front of me again. I sighed and continued walking, telling myself it was a coincidence, or I was imagining things. But as he came back into focus, a distant part of my mind screamed that I was in danger. I made the mistake of shoving that voice and its wisdom to the back of my mind. I had to get home. I didn't want to walk in the tall grass and risk getting a tick. And the gray man was going to be there no matter what did. So I might as well follow the tracks until I made it back home. This time when the gray man got closer, the smell was the first thing that greeted me. I choked down my vomit and blinked tears from my eyes as I took a deep breath and held it. When the man was about 10 feet from me, something in his smile changed. He didn't move exactly, but his lower jaw seemed to grow, as if the hinges of his jaw were melting and allowing his face to sink lower and lower. For the first time, his eyes met mine, and I knew I had made a horrible mistake. By the time he passed me, his jaw was down to his chest, but his eyes had never left mine. Once he was behind me, I began sprinting, only interested in getting home before it was completely dark. Up ahead, I could just see the bright blue X I had spray painted on the tree, and I veered away from the tracks again, now running through the grass with no other thought in mind than getting back home. But as I ran, my vision began to blur slightly. The shadows of the trees turned gray and seemed to take on more form. Something gray appeared right in front of the tree I had painted on, slowly morphing into a gray man walking towards me, trash bag swinging from his hand. I halted, waited until he was a few feet from me, then bolted to the side into the tree line. I crashed through the trees wildly, paying attention to nothing except the gray smudges that would appear in front of me, taking shape into the man more rapidly each time. By the time I saw my house in the distance, the gray man was practically running alongside me, smile still carved into his face, bag still swinging in his hand, liquid and whatever else it contained sloshing around inside. I made it inside and locked the doors and windows, but outside I could still see the two pale shadows lurking, taking on the form of a man before disappearing again. I left Pennsylvania not long after that. It lost all its charm for me. But when I lay down in bed at night, all I can see when I close my eyes is the gray man, off in the distance. He gets closer every night, and I know someday he'll catch me. Story 3 ends here. Now, listen closely to Story 4. I was the captain and only surviving member of the Erebus disaster. The cavernous blackness loomed before us, a gaping maw hungrily waiting for whatever fool dared to venture into its depths. Although all light was lost only a few inches in, shards of broken coral and shell rimmed its opening, refracting the headlights of our vessel in a strange pattern of splintered rainbows across the sea floor. Anyone else would see a wicked, jagged-toothed sneer, a warning to turn back. But those of us aboard the Erebus only saw promise. The Erebus was an experimental deep-sea lab designed to carry a multinational research team to the depths of the Mariana Trench to study extremophile life and tectonic activity. Aboard, we had a xenobiologist, a geologist, a technician and systems operator, a Navy lieutenant acting as our military liaison and security, and myself, the captain. And on our third day at the bottom of the ocean, just east of a subset of islands near Guam, I stationed us at the lip of the deepest known point of Earth's seabed. All we had to do was cross that barrier of never-ending dark and plummet forth to the small, slot-shaped valley on the trench's floor. All we had to do was breach Challenger deep. Are we ready, folks? Of course I knew they were ready. These people, except for maybe the lieutenant, had been preparing for this for years. So after looking each of them in the eye and detecting not anxious apprehension at facing an unknown few men had ever braved before, but instead an unwavering resolve, I began our descent. Deeper and deeper the Erebus crawled. Natalia Reyes, the technician, steadily worked the knobs and dials on the console in front of her. She was equalizing the pressure and monitoring the sonar system while I guided us through the void. The plan was to settle on the floor of the deep, 11,000 meters below the surface, and spend whatever time we needed mapping not only the topography but the life, not just the extremophile microscopic organisms that thrived in extreme environments or the anglerfish of nightmares. Dr. Patricia Voss, the xenobiologist, had some grandiose desire to find sentience. Through her research, however harebrained other experts perceived her to be, she believed she had discovered the capacity for free thought in the depths of the ocean, and this mission was her chance to prove it. Maybe she was right, but I think all those thoughts swirling in that big brain of hers with nowhere to go gave her a god complex. We were following a rough topographical sketch of the trench that Don Walsh and Jacques Picard had laid out following their first voyage to the bottom with the Trieste. Dr. Niels Halberg, the geologist, had it laid out before him and assured us as we descended that everything we were seeing matched up with what had been recorded. Lieutenant Wade Harker stoically gazed at Natalia, who was doing just what she needed to in order to keep things steady. And Dr. Voss was poring over her notebooks and charts, muttering to herself about who knows what. But as we neared the 11,000th meter, a rumble from below shook the Erebus just enough to get us all to notice. Normally, this wouldn't have been anything to worry about. The Mariana Trench region is known to have its fair share of geological activity of varying intensities. Active volcanoes, earthquakes, hydrothermal vent systems, things like that. It was the creaking of tectonic plates shifting and separating that worried us. Natalia and I did our best to keep the sea lab on the straight and narrow, following our original trajectory, but the activity below us forced our hand. We looked out the sheath of inches-thick glass in front of us and beheld a fissure cracking open the ocean floor. It started as a hairline fracture along the silty bottom of the valley of the trench, almost imperceptible beneath the crushing obscurity of the dark oblivion. Then with a deep seismic groan, as if the earth was taking its first exhale after holding its breath for eons, it widened. Sediment billowed up in plumes as the crevice tore through the seabed like wet tissue paper. Superheated gases bubbled up in frantic bursts, rising from the void as brittle coral formations crumbled and drifted into it. The surrounding terrain gave one final terrible tremble and then all settled, leaving a yawning rift in its wake. "What the hell is that?" Natalia breathed in an awe-struck whisper, craning her neck to get a better view. "Niels, do you know what could have caused that?" The geologist had a look of terror on his face that told me he had no idea, but still he responded, "I mean, it had to have been some sort of earthquake. Maybe too much pressure built up in a vent over time and it finally just burst." He continued on, rattling off a multitude of explanations while the rest of the crew listened with rapt attention. Well, all except for one. The rest of them may not have seen, but I did. Dr. Voss was still hunched over her notes, still muttering, but now there was a broad grin plastered on her face. I never got a clear answer as to why she was so pleased, and she's not around any longer to tell. But as our days above that newly formed fissure progressed, I started to think that maybe her muttering had something to do with its creation. As the dust settled and the shock of watching a natural phenomenon happen before our eyes wore off, a discussion of what to do next ensued. Did we continue with the original plan? Or now that we were faced with this great, profound wonder, did we take what fate had gifted us and explore further? I don't think myself or the lieutenant were all too excited to veer off course, but the three big brains on board saw no other option. We would dock the Erebus on the floor of Challenger Deep, but rather than explore the valley that surrounded us, we would dive deeper than any man had ever dreamed to venture. On that first day, we decided to send out a small exploratory vessel that sent a live feed of what it was seeing back to us. Natalia and myself would be in charge of guiding it while Dr. Halberd mapped what he saw. Voss would get her chance when we took a water sample or if Halberd found any living thing as he watched the live feed, but until then she just got to sit back and watch the magic. We led the little pod, aptly named the Noctis rover, into the split and found ourselves surrounded not by the basalt walls of the Earth's crust, but instead in a cavernous opening, as if this trench within a trench had always existed and we had merely cracked its shell. We were beyond the Hadal zone. We were in a world that was utterly alien. At first it appeared lifeless, nothing more than a grotto of fine gray silt and jagged rock formations. But the further the rover went, the more we noticed. There were strange, translucent creatures drifting slowly in front of its mechanical eyes. Not unlike sea cucumbers, the pale and gelatinous forms moved in sluggish waves. Noctis continued its extensive dive and witnessed soft, flabby bodies with the vacant expressions of deep-sea blindness hovering just above the surfaces of jutting outcrops littering the walls in staccatoed succession. Improbable life was clinging to every facade. Fields of tube worms, microbial mats with a faint bioluminescent glow, nourished only by chemicals released from the depths of the earth rather than sunlight. And in its quiet stillness, it was easy to believe we were the first to ever see it. We had stumbled upon the end of the world, or perhaps the beginning of one. And then, amongst the awesomeness of unknowable teeming life, we saw it. The Noctis rover had caught something massive in its sights, hewn from roughly shaped stones stuck together without the help of any type of mortar. A cyclopean structure. It was almost castle-like. Something pulled straight from the legends of giants and eldritch gods. It rose from the inky blackness not as if it were built, but as if it had grown from some ancient impulse in the stone itself. It defied the laws of all familiar geometry and physics, with impossibly large blocks each the size of a small house. So precisely aligned that not even the thinnest blade could slip between its cracks. Its walls leaned at unnatural angles, tilting inward and outward, enmeshed with one another in a jaunty dance. and their surfaces, weathered and pitted, were etched with symbols whose meaning had long since decayed. The architecture of this place did not follow the logic of human design. It took an incredulous gasp from Natalia to snap us all back to reality. "What is it?" Harker asked, still not taking his eyes off of what the screen in front of us was displaying. "The sonar, it's picking up a frequency. It's extremely low, and it's being emitted by that thing, that structure." This was the point when Dr. Voss decided to leave her notes and speak up. "We should take the Erebus down there. You know where Noctis is. That's where we should dock." "Are you insane?" Harker scoffed. "We have no idea what's down there or if it's safe. I know you scientists are all about discovery and new frontiers and all of that, but I think this is where I draw the line, don't you think, Captain?" He looked to me expectantly. "I mean, I think that while I am just along for the ride and here to take you folks wherever you need to go, I don't know what kind of pressure we're looking at down there," and before I could finish, Natalia cut me off, assuring us all that she could handle it. That the Erebus could handle it. Doctors Voss and Halberd nodded along emphatically. If you ask me, I think the science side of their brains took over the logical side, if those two can be separated from one another in the first place. They were just too damn excited to be more than researchers. They were on the cusp of becoming discoverers. So the rest of day one was spent with Natalia and myself guiding the ship down into that sunken grotto beneath the seafloor and carefully perching ourselves atop one of the outcroppings that got us as eye level with the structure as we could be. With how quickly things progressed on that first day, it should have come as no surprise to any of us that by day two, the three scientists were bordering on obsessed. Natalia had set about trying to figure out what kind of thing could be creating that sound, while Niels attempted to decode how on earth something like this could have even been formed in the first place. And of course, Voss was back to her muttering and scribbling, leaving Harker and myself with lots of spare time and little to talk about. We had already rifled through the usual topics of conversation one opens themselves up to when stumbling upon the absurd, and we surely couldn't deign to talk about something as inconsequential as the weather. "What do you think she's always whispering to herself about?" Harker questioned, casting a sidelong glance to Dr. Voss. "Beats me, but I don't like it. It comes across as fanaticism, don't you think? That sort of thing festers, and what festers can spread. I don't want that kind of attitude infecting the other two. I'll keep an eye out. Whatever it is, I'm with you, buddy. I won't let things get out of hand." I didn't know what he necessarily meant by that or what a trained military official who had been sent as our security on a deep-sea research expedition was capable of, but I sure didn't want to find out. I trusted that Harker would keep the best interests of the group at the forefront, and I had to let that be that. Otherwise, the implications could drive me crazy. Looking back, I suppose I didn't have to worry about that for too long, because on the eve of day 3, shit hit the fan. By day 4, they were all dead. I awoke that next morning to find Dr. Halberd wildly flitting through pages of notes, eyes bloodshot and voice hoarse. "Niels, is everything all right?" I asked slowly, calmly. "I've almost got it, almost got it, almost got it." His voice trailed off. "Patricia told me this would happen. She knew I would be the perfect one for the job." "Patricia? You mean Dr. Voss? What job, Niels?" "Figuring it out." "Figuring what out, Dr. Halberd?" I addressed him by his proper title, maybe showing him that respect would remind him of his position. "The architecture, my boy, the architecture, the symbols, the message to open the gate. You see, it's not sleeping, it's trapped. Trapped in a prison of pressure and stone, bound by an ancient and extinct civilization who believed they understood the cost of its freedom. But they were wrong. Wrong. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew it was the ramblings of a man who had gone batty, and it sounded to me like Voss had something to do with it. For the moment, I left Niels to his rifling and gathered the lieutenant and Natalia to tell them about the scene that had just unfolded before me. Natalia seemed worried, but Wade again assured me that he wouldn't let things get out of hand. He's just some crackpot who's gotten all wrapped up in his research. We've only got a few more days down here until we're meant to ascend, so let him and Voss keep spewing their mumbo-jumbo. There's no harm in it as long as they keep it to themselves. How are you feeling, Reyes? You gonna go crazy on us too? Other than myself, Natalia was the last person I expected to go crazy on anyone. She was mild-mannered and even-tempered, and always seemed to have a solid voice of reason. She shook her head no and scoffed. You couldn't pay me to get in on the kind of research those two have been talking about. I think the dark and the quiet are getting to them, but I think you're right, Lieutenant. As long as the three of us keep calm, we can stick out the final few days. We didn't last longer than 12 more hours. Stirrawal broke through the silence of sleep. I ran to the ship's hub to find Natalia, slack-jawed and stunned, standing over the body of Lieutenant Wade Harker. She was trying not to cry, but the glassy sheen to her eyes told me it wouldn't be too much longer until the floodgates opened. Niels was pounding a clenched fist clutched around a bloody scalpel against our only window into the beyond. Behind it, the Masonic marvel was still towering, and the hum of the sound only detectable by sonar was stronger now, causing the water in its vicinity to ripple out from its walls in vibrating waves. Niels was saying something. The words were quick, deliberate, yet still incoherent. It sounded like Ejoth ear, but even that wasn't right. Natalia, Niels, what's happening? I questioned. I don't know. I heard banging and came out here, and Wade was just down and Niels was just like that. What's he saying? I don't know, but the more I listen, it's kind of pretty, isn't it? It sounds like music. Natalia, what are you? And before I could react, Natalia started in with Niels. Yajkoth ear, Yajkoth ear, Yajkoth ear, Yajkoth ear, Yajkoth ear. Beautiful, isn't it? Dr. Voss intoned from behind me. Patricia, what do you know? What is this? They're speaking the name of the seed beneath the root of time, a god. Well, not in the traditional sense, more of an intelligence, really, that precedes causality. She lives coiled in the folds of forgotten dimensions, looping endlessly, waiting for her followers to speak her name. It's a ripple in the loom of reality. Can't you feel it? Your bones itching beneath your skin with patterns of unfamiliar geometry? Those symbols were designed to contain her, to keep her locked in the threads between dimensions. But we've figured out how to set her free, and for that she will grant me eternity. What the fuck was this woman talking about? Gods, intelligence, forgotten dimensions? It was too much for me to handle. I needed to get Natalia and Niels to snap out of whatever trance Voss had put them in and get them the hell out of here. I didn't care what happened to the good doctor, but I did care that myself and my compatriots got our asses onto the life egress vehicle attached to the back of the Erebus and got ourselves to the surface. I took the subtlest step towards them that I could, when all of a sudden Niels stopped his rhythmic chanting. Natalia continued on, but there was something grievously wrong with Niels. His eyes rolled back into his head, exposing the inflamed veins flecking the whites. He was clearly fighting against something, and in a heartbeat, it won. Fleshy nodules began to appear all over his body like swollen insect bites, bulbous and sickening. They strained his skin until it shined, taut and waxy. Clustered across his back, neck, arms, some remained the peachy pink of skin with fine tendrils suspended just below their surface like nerves or mycelium, while others darkened into a deep mottled purple or a livid, burning red. As they formed, they twitched and shifted, as if all of the muscles and tendons beneath were rearranging themselves to make way for this anatomical anomaly. They began to seep a clear, viscous fluid as thick as resin that left them coated in a slick, glistening sheen that made them twitch at their exposure to air. He began beating the glass harder and harder, slamming his entire body into it, thin vein-like cracks beginning to bristle out from his point of impact. Natalia continued letting her words flow over one another like silk. And Voss laughed and laughed. They were going to die here, but I wasn't. I got into the LEV and programmed its mechanics as quickly as possible. As I began my ascent to the surface, I took one final fleeting glance at the ruin I was leaving behind. I don't know how Niels's body was still whole, but there it was, suspended in the water with arms outstretched like Christ himself, sporting that same bioluminescent glow as all of the symbiotes of the deep. The fleshy nodules that had littered his form began to pulse, as if something inside were pushing, writhing, impatient to emerge. And then, the flesh around them tightened, drawing inward in slow, throbbing contractions. One by one they sank, slipping beneath the surface of his skin, melting into it. The surrounding tissue rippled gently like water disturbed by a submerged hand, before settling smooth again. The sickly blue-green aura around Niels blazed, and with that his skin split. The nodules had not disappeared, they had gone deeper, only to burst forth from ruptured mounds, leaving shallow, red-cratered sockets rimmed with torn dermis and twitching muscle behind. And from each of these grotesque holes slithered a glistening veined orb, slick with amniotic fluid. The eyeballs continued to shoot out of poor Niels, each one with pearl-gray sclera and irises that swirled a luminescent black like an oil slick. They trailed long, fine, root-like nerves that drifted in their wake like the tendrils of some freakish jellyfish. The filaments writhed in an obscene manner, as though they were tasting their new environment, sensitive and searching. They did not stay still. They dangled, unmoving for mere seconds, until at once, in one grand, sweeping, synchronous movement, they turned their focus to the movement of my pod. It was a monstrous choreography of awareness, blooming from the realization of newly found sentience. And it was in that moment I knew that whatever god Dr. Voss had been searching for from the very beginning had been freed, with the ocean itself its new body, a flood of madness spreading through the seas. I made it out because I didn't let myself fall down the claustrophobic labyrinthine tunnel of discovery. You see, in those few short days, 11,000 meters deep, I learned that the unknowable vastness of the ocean can be both a sanctuary and a prison. It stretches in every direction, promising depth and revelation. It has no floor, only layers and currents and truths buried so far below the surface that reaching them may drown you. The deeper you go, the higher the pressure mounts, the more the light fades. And this is where the pursuit of understanding, once infinite and thrilling, becomes a tunnel. Tight, spiraling, recursive. And while it is a place where mystery still breathes, it is also a place of isolation, obsession, and descent. Not everything that is buried is meant to be unearthed, and down there in that cold pressure of the dark, you must ask yourself, do I still want answers? Or do I just want to find the bottom and rest? Story 4 ends here, and now we enter the fog of Story 5. Joseph's skin. At first, I thought she was changing him, or he was changing himself the way people do when they fall in love, slowly, naturally. And while it felt anything but natural, it was slow, painfully, deliberately slow. Joseph still laughs at his own jokes, wears that wide, guileless smile, reserves a tighter one for polite company. He has a scar on his left cheek from a childhood fight. That was over a girl, too. At least that was our story. He bled more than expected, I cried more than necessary, but it faded into a natural part of his human topography. His own mother wouldn't be able to tell them apart, but he's different. Irreparably so, but invisibly like mold settling into the floorboards of condemned home. I'm the only one that knows it. A place full of strangers. That's where the notion crept into my mind, fully bloomed. Joseph made me his +1. It was his girlfriend's birthday, his first public appearance as her boyfriend. This was one of those romances where the social circles did not overlap. He had a knack for dating people who had nothing in common with the friends he kept, meaning me. Joseph and I were all the other really had, repeating the same comfortable rituals together for over a decade, watching the same movies, quoting the same lines. Every hard drive I've ever owned had at least 2 folders worth of games or comics or some other project he'd convince me to start but never finish. I'd do the art, he'd do dialogue. He was always better with people, or at least seemed to know how they talked. Better does not suggest good, but at least few steps above me. It didn't matter, we were best friends and it was us against the world. He brought the snacks, knew which games had local co-op. I was the quiet one, more online than offline. Still am. Leaving my apartment feels like being plucked from a fishbowl. That is to say, yes, I've been stagnant, and he's been changing. I don't know how to quantify it without sounding bitter. He began dressing with intention, cuffed his pants, buttoned his shirt a couple notches higher. He held eye contact longer, spoke louder. As for me, just being around people makes my ears burn. The party felt like a test that I was failing, miserably so. Joseph should have been my beacon, a lighthouse guiding me through a sea of strangers, just like always. He should have been safe. That night, his presence felt more like standing beneath a fluorescent lamp, an uncanny sensation that had been building for a while, but I finally felt overexposed, studied, like the entire room was picking me apart, especially him. Though to what end, I couldn't know. He'd quote the same lines, then pause. I'm sure of it. Not for laughter, but to gauge my reaction, checking to see what he got right. His mannerisms were one shade too unfamiliar, like he'd rehearsed them in a mirror. You wouldn't notice unless you'd seen them a million times, from his passenger seat or his ancient couch, swapping stories at 3 in the morning. Inside jokes with no cheeky glint of recognition. His eyes were dim. Joseph dated a couple girls, but none that stuck. Not like this. A girl might make him change his plans, but not the way he looked at me. That's when it clicked. He made a joke to kill the silence. The silence endured. He drummed his fingers against his glass the way he always did during lulls in conversation. His usual, a gin and ginger and more gin. The ice had melted without him taking a single sip. Had those nails ever looked so clean, so manicured? What if it wasn't Joseph? As fantastic as that sounds, I couldn't shake the thought. It was the only thing that made sense, and as good a reason as any to take off early. I waited until he was preoccupied, till I could slip out without being followed. Having lost my ride, I walked all the way home, an hour in the snow. Before you ask, I can't do public transit. For me, taking the metro alone is even harder than staying till the end of a party. There are too many unknowns. The next morning, my excuses began. I'm fine, felt sick. Can't tonight, I'm busy. Not feeling well today either, maybe next week. It remembers everything, all the stories I've told him, though sometimes it adds a detail he shouldn't know. What it certainly knows is I'm never too busy for Joseph, not historically. At least it's been cold here, cold enough to defend my homebody lifestyle. But spring has arrived. My excuses are melting. Sometimes it'll call. We'll talk about the same things, speak the secret language shared by lifelong friends. It's off. It feels hollow, like it's pressing playback on bits and pieces of 1,000 conversations past. And then I'll dream. I'll dream I'm dropping towards the ocean floor, down, down, delirious from lack of oxygen, waiting for some unknown horror to part the murky depths just as I slow my descent. A pair of hands break the surface of the water from impossibly high above, pale and jointless, wrapping around my wrist and throat more like tendrils than fingers. I want to believe they're saving me, but something tightens, burrows. It's trying to wear me on the way back up. The winter was bitter. Joseph had a habit of keeping his door unlocked. He said he lived in a safe neighborhood, but nowhere in this city is safe, not really. The truth is, he was always forgetting things. His wallet, his keys. He got sick of breaking in through his own window and then just stopped caring. He spent much of the time blissfully unaware that his shirt was inside out. And now he was matching his belt to his shoes, yeah. Sure. Then that terrible storm ripped through town like a banshee, wind screaming, covering everything in her powdery white cloak. He lost power for 3.5 days. The streets were dark. They felt gutted, like something sinister had blown in with the snow, forced open our doors and ripped the wiring from our homes. And now I think perhaps it did. But it didn't break in, just tried every door until it found the one that opened without resistance. I imagine it stepping quietly over the threshold. I imagine it finding Joseph asleep on the couch, mouth hung dumbly open. No pillow, no blanket, but he's warm enough for whatever this thing is. I imagine it gently presses his skin to see how well it might fit. Then it slides in. Not violently like the blizzard that masked its arrival, but with unusual patience. Cautious not to rip his seams, it pulls him apart from the inside, not all at once. Maybe it takes weeks to fold itself into his shape, unwinding him with careful intent, keeping what memories it needed and eating away at the rest until there was nothing left of him. Just a human skin pulled taut over something unspeakable. It is patient and relentless. It is smart because Joseph was smart in his own way. Soon enough, it won't wait for me to accept its invitation. It will come to me directly, stand in front of my door, and claim to be checking on me. It will feign concern with Joseph's furrowed brows, ask me, with Joseph's mouth drawn down at the corners, why I'm isolating myself. Tell me I'd been making such good progress. It will make me doubt what I already know until I allow it past my threshold unguarded, like his was. And when it hollows me out, it will look like me, sound like me. It will not be me. As evening falls, it will hang my skin next to his like a couple of suit jackets. Together again. I've been sleeping with a large kitchen knife beneath my pillow. While I lay in bed, I wonder if it can hurt, the way that Joseph hurt. And can I bring myself to hurt it without it bleeding too much, without crying more than necessary? I know that it's not my friend, but a frog to dissect. I'm in my 6th grade science lab realizing our frog was paralyzed, not yet dead. It was supposed to be dead, right? Joseph made me promise not to tell. We shook on it. Then I'm in his basement. The old basement, though it is decidedly the modern Joseph laid before me. He is tacked to the billiard table with nickel-plated pins. His eyes are white. I think they're rolled back, searching for the invader inside him, seeing nothing. He wants it out as bad as me. I will delicately peel back the layers of his torso and rescue all the parts of Joseph that are still inside. Must be inside. When I put him back together, the scars will fade and we'll forget it ever happened. Just as before. His skin is sallow and his heart should not beat, but it does, laid agonizingly bare. I reach for it and his ribs close on my wrist like a steel trap. I'm searching my sweat-soaked bed sheets for the knife before I'm even aware the dream is over. What a relief to find it's just where I'd left it. And what a vivid imagination. That's why I did the art, and he did the writing. He was the down-to-earth one, the realistic one. I hear it rattle the knob to my front door, quietly like a boy sneaking in after curfew. It's barely audible over the pounding of my heart, but I'm sure it wants me to wonder, am I not yet awake, to let my guard down? It knows my door will not yield as easily as Joseph's, but needs me to hear it uselessly turning the knob. It will stand there until the automated lights of the hallway dim, constantly repeating the action softly enough that I might rise from the safety of my blankets, check and confirm if it was ever there at all. I do not. Its light, receding footsteps provide me little relief. The thing inside Joseph knows I'm onto it. It also knows I'm a basket case, that when I get like this, I can't function. Get so scared of people that I can barely order food for fear I'll have to talk to the delivery guy. I've been living on credit for weeks and I'm afraid to check the balance. I can't. I'll need to open up eventually. It might bring me leftovers in an orange-stained container, maybe then. Perhaps I'll just grow tired of waiting, leave the door unlocked. With him gone, I have nobody left to tell, nobody who'd believe me anyway. It knows that too. That's why I'm writing. Not for help, really. I think I'm beyond that. This is a record in case I start dressing better, showing up to things, acting like someone worth the skin I'm in. That's how it starts. Needless to say, it's been a while since I've gone outside. The seasons are changing and the air in the apartment has gone thick and warm. Stale. Did I crack a window? I hope not, but I'm uncertain. It sounds like a storm's rolling in and I'm afraid to leave my bed. I know how this comes off. Like I'm hiding from the boogeyman, like I'm unwell. But the light in my den burnt out a few days ago and I haven't had the energy or the bulb to fix it. It is dark beyond my bedroom door and the shadows play tricks with my eyes. In that dark, in the den, I hear a tree scratching at the window pane. Gentle, purposeful strokes. My brain keeps filling in the gaps where it shouldn't. Would you check? This time I think I might. The outcome will not change if I'm correct, but if you've made it this far, please, tell me it's only the trees.